Most people spend their lives looking through windows. Clean ones if they're fortunate, dirty ones if they're not. But what I am inviting you to consider is far more radical, removing the window altogether. Behind every perception, every concept, every belief you hold dear, lies a reality so startlingly obvious that its simplicity has rendered it invisible to you. The eyes that truly see aren't looking for something special or extraordinary. They've simply stopped filtering, stopped naming, stopped separating. And in that cessation, something miraculous happens. The world reveals itself not as you think it is, but as it actually is. What I'm about to share isn't information to be gathered or wisdom to be attained. It's more like an invitation to put down the binoculars through which you've been desperately searching the horizon, only to discover that what you seek has been in your hands all along. The spiritual journey isn't about climbing a mountain. It's about finally noticing the ground beneath your feet. Let's begin with something rather obvious, yet utterly profound. Right now, as you listen to my voice, you believe you're experiencing the world directly. But are you really? Or are you experiencing your thoughts about the world, your interpretations, your judgments? You see, from the moment we're born, we're taught not how to see, but how not to see. We're conditioned to overlay reality with concepts, with labels, with judgments, with stories. This is a tree, that is a cloud, this is good, that is bad. And we become so hypnotized by these labels that we mistake them for the reality they're meant to represent. The spiritually awakened eyes see through this conditioning. They see the raw, unnamed world before the mind divides it into separate things. They see what Zen masters call suchness or thusness. The world as it is, not as we think it is. Imagine for a moment that you're looking at a tree. You say, that's a tree. But what if I told you that what you're seeing isn't a tree at all? It's an ongoing process that has no clear boundaries. Where does the tree begin? At the tips of its branches, at the surface of its bark, at its roots? And where do those roots end and the soil begin? Where does the soil end and the groundwater begin? You see, the tree is inseparable from everything else. It's not a separate object, but a pattern in a unified field, a temporary arrangement in the continuous flux of nature. And this is what spiritually awakened eyes see. Not objects, but processes. Not separate entities, but patterns in the indivisible whole. But here's the funny thing. This isn't some exotic state achieved only after years of meditation. It's simply what's left when you stop imposing your mental categories on reality. It's what the Zen masters call beginner's mind. Seeing without preconceptions, without the filter of past experience. The veils of perception aren't something added to your vision. They're what you've been taught to subtract from it. And the spiritually awakened eyes don't see more. They see less. Less interpretation, less judgment, less separation. And in seeing less of these mental overlays, they paradoxically see more of what's actually there. So the first thing that spiritually awakened eyes see is reality without the veils of conceptual thinking. They see what is rather than what they think is. And that simple shift in perspective changes everything. Now let's delve into perhaps the most pervasive illusion of all, the illusion that you are a separate self, a skin-encapsulated ego isolated from the rest of the universe. From the moment we're born, we're taught to identify with this body, this name, this personal history. I am John. I am Mary. And with this identification comes the profound sense of separation. I am here, and the world is out there. I am inside my skin, and everything else is outside. But what if this sense of separation is merely a useful social convention that we've mistaken for an absolute truth? What if the boundary between self and other isn't as solid as we think? Consider this. Every atom in your body was once part of something else. The carbon in your cells was once part of ancient stars. The water in your blood was once in the ocean, in clouds, in rivers. The air in your lungs was just now outside of you, and before that it might have been inside countless other beings. You are not a static, isolated entity. You are a process, a pattern, a whirlpool in the river of life. The boundaries that seem so solid are actually porous, constantly exchanging matter and energy with the environment. The spiritually awakened eyes see through this illusion of separation. They recognize what the mystics of all traditions have discovered, that the sense of being a separate self is a mental construction, a useful fiction, but not an absolute reality. When the Upanishads declare Tata Mari, thou art that, they're pointing to this profound truth. You are not separate from the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself from a particular point of view. You are not in the world. You are an expression of the world. Just as a wave is not in the ocean, but is the ocean waving. And here's where it gets really fascinating. Once you see through the illusion of separation, the fear that permeates so much of human life begins to dissolve. Fear, after all, is based on the idea that something out there can threaten something in here. But what if there is no solid boundary between out there and in here? The spiritually awakened eyes see interconnection where others see separation. They see unity where others see multiplicity. They see, as the Buddhists say, that we inter-are, that nothing exists independently of everything else. And this isn't some abstract philosophical concept. It's a direct perception, a seeing that transcends the conceptual mind. It's recognizing that the self is not a thing but a process, not an island but a relationship. It's seeing that you are not in the universe, you are the universe. Not a fragment of it, but the whole thing expressed in this particular form at this particular moment. Have you ever been completely absorbed in a movie only to suddenly become aware of the screen? Or perhaps you've been caught up in a dream only to realize you're dreaming. That moment of recognition, that shift in perspective, that's what spiritually awakened eyes experience with regard to what I like to call the game of life. You see, we are playing an elaborate game, a cosmic hide and seek. And the first rule of this game is that it's not a game. We must take it seriously. We must believe that our survival, our happiness, our very worth depends on how well we play it. We must forget that we agreed to these rules in the first place. The game has many names. The rat race, keeping up with the Joneses, the pursuit of success, the ladder of achievement. It's the game where money is the score, status is the prize, and death is the ultimate defeat to be avoided at all costs. Spiritually awakened eyes see through this game. They recognize it for what it is, a magnificent play, a dance, a cosmic drama, but not something to be taken with ultimate seriousness, not something worth sacrificing your joy, your presence, your compassion for. I'm reminded of the Hindu concept of Leela, divine play. The idea that the entire universe, with all its joys and sorrows, its triumphs and tragedies, is God playing hide and seek with himself, pretending to be many when he is really one, pretending to be you and me and everyone else. When you see through the game, you don't necessarily stop playing it. You still go to work, pay your bills, pursue your goals, but you do so with a certain lightness, a certain humor, a certain perspective. You play the game knowing it's a game, and that makes all the difference. It's the difference between being a puppet who thinks it's pulling its own strings and a puppet who sees the strings and dances anyway, joyfully participating in the cosmic puppet show. The spiritually awakened eyes see life not as a grim struggle for survival, but as a playful dance of energy. Not as a serious journey towards some future salvation, but as an expression of the eternal now. Not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be lived. And here's the delicious irony. When you stop taking the game so seriously, you often play it better. When you release your white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel of life, you often find yourself driving more skillfully. When you stop desperately pursuing happiness, you often find yourself happier. Seeing through the game doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or retreating from life. It means engaging with life from a place of freedom rather than compulsion, from a place of play rather than desperation, from a place of love rather than fear. The game is not the enemy. Taking the game to be reality. That's the trap. And spiritually awakened eyes see both the game and the reality beyond it. They see both the wave and the ocean, both the dance and the dancer. Have you noticed how rarely you're actually here? I don't mean physically. Your body is certainly occupying space right now. I mean mentally, attentionally. How often is your mind somewhere else, replaying the past, rehearsing the future, lost in abstractions? We've been conditioned to believe that time is a line stretching from past to future with the present as a moving point on that line. But this is merely a convenient fiction, a useful way of organizing experience, but not the fundamental nature of time itself. Spiritually awakened eyes see through this linear conception of time. They recognize what mystics have always known, that the only time that ever exists is now. The past exists only as memory in the present. The future exists only as anticipation in the present. All experience, all life, all reality happens in this eternal now. When you truly see this, something remarkable happens. The anxious preoccupation with past and future begins to dissolve. The neurotic patterns of regret and worry begin to lose their grip. You start to recognize that you've never lived in any moment except this one, and you never will. I'm not suggesting some kind of perpetual blissed-out state where you never think about yesterday or tomorrow. The awakened mind can still use the concepts of past and future when practical, to learn from experience, to make plans. But it doesn't mistake these concepts for reality. It doesn't get lost in them. Think of it this way. You've been living your entire life in a magnificent palace with countless rooms, but you've spent most of your time huddled in the basement, poring over blueprints of the palace, making notes about rooms you visited yesterday, worrying about the condition of rooms you might visit tomorrow. Meanwhile, the actual palace, the present moment, remains largely unexplored. Spiritually awakened eyes look up from the blueprints and see the palace itself. They perceive the richness, the depth, the aliveness of the present moment. They recognize that now is not just a fleeting instant between past and future, but the very substance of existence. The Zen masters have a wonderful saying, when walking, just walk. When eating, just eat. This isn't about forcing yourself to concentrate. It's about recognizing that you are always only doing one thing, experiencing now. Everything else is conceptual overlay. And here's where it gets truly fascinating. When you begin to inhabit the now more fully, time itself seems to change its character. Sometimes it expands, so that a single moment seems to contain endless depth. Sometimes it disappears altogether, and you find yourself in what the mystics call the eternal present. Not an endless duration, but a dimension beyond time itself. To the spiritually awakened eyes, eternity is not an infinite amount of time. It's the timeless. Now, that underlies all temporal experience. It's not something to be achieved after death, but something to be recognized in the midst of life. And this recognition is not just some abstract philosophical insight. It transforms how you live. When you're no longer constantly leaning away from the present into some imagined future, you discover a profound peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You discover that what you've been seeking in the future has been here all along, hiding in plain sight in the eternal now. Now, let's explore something truly fascinating that spiritually awakened eyes perceive: the dance between form and emptiness. We are taught to focus on things, objects, entities, substances. Our language, our thinking, our very perception is oriented toward nouns rather than verbs, towards static objects rather than dynamic processes. We see a chair, a mountain, a person, solid, separate, substantial things. But what if this substance-oriented view is a kind of selective attention? What if we are focusing on the figures and ignoring the ground? What if we're so entranced by the notes that we miss the silence between them? Spiritually awakened eyes see both form and emptiness, both somethingness and nothingness. They see that every form arises from and returns to emptiness like waves on the ocean. They see that emptiness is not just absence but pregnant possibility, not just nothingness but the womb of all things. In the Heart Sutra, that profound Buddhist text, we find the provocative statement, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Not form and emptiness are two aspects of reality, but form is emptiness. They are not two. What does this mean? It means that every seemingly solid thing is actually a process, a temporary pattern, a dance of energy. It means that nothing has independent, inherent existence. Everything is interdependent, interconnected, interwoven with everything else. Let me offer an analogy. Think of a whirlpool in a stream. The whirlpool has form, pattern, identity. You can point to it and say, there's the whirlpool. But what is it made of? Water. And the water is flowing through it, constantly changing. The whirlpool is not a thing but a pattern that water temporarily takes. In the same way, you are not a thing but a process, a pattern that the universe temporarily takes. You are not made of anything other than universe. There is no boundary where you end and the rest of reality begins. This is what the spiritually awakened eyes see. The dance between form and emptiness, the play of pattern and flow. They see that all forms are empty of separate, independent existence. And that emptiness is not blank nothingness, but the very possibility of all forms. And here's the most remarkable part. This perception is not depressing, but liberating. When you recognize that you are not a separate, solid entity, but a fluid process, a dance of emptiness and form, the burden of maintaining a fixed identity begins to lift. The fear of losing yourself begins to dissolve. The anxiety about past and future begins to ease. You begin to experience what Buddhists call the great perfection. The recognition that reality as it is in this very moment, with all its impermanence and interdependence, is already complete, already whole, already perfect. Not because it matches some ideal standard, but because it couldn't possibly be other than what it is. The dance of emptiness is not something to be achieved or attained. It's what's already happening. It's what you already are. The spiritually awakened eyes simply recognize what has been true all along. Have you ever considered that what appears solid and substantial to our ordinary perception might be more like music than matter? That what seems like static objects might actually be dynamic rhythms, vibrations, frequencies? It's rather curious that our modern physics has arrived at a conclusion that the ancient mystics intuited thousands of years ago, that the seemingly solid world is mostly empty space, patterns of energy, vibrations in fields. What your senses tell you is a solid chair is actually at the atomic level almost entirely empty space with tiny particles zipping around, held together by invisible forces. And those particles themselves, upon closer inspection, dissolve into probability waves, into mathematical patterns, into, dare I say it, vibrations. Spiritually awakened eyes perceive this vibratory nature of reality, not in the sense of seeing subatomic particles that would require quite unusual eyes indeed, but in the sense of directly intuiting the dynamic, rhythmic, musical nature of what appears static and solid. The ancient Hindus spoke of Nada Brahma, the world as sound, the universe as vibration. They intuited that underlying the apparent multiplicity of forms is a unified field of vibrating energy. They call this primordial vibration arm, or M, the unstruck sound, the sound without a cause, the hum of existence itself. When you begin to perceive the world in this way, something remarkable happens. The hard edges of reality begin to soften. The rigid boundaries between things begin to blur. The world becomes less like a museum of separate artifacts and more like a symphony of interrelated themes, less like a machine made of parts and more like a dance of interpenetrating pattern. You begin to sense that you are not moving through the world. You are vibrating with it. You are not separate from the cosmic symphony. You are a note within it. Your body, your thoughts, your very sense of self are particular patterns of vibration within the larger pattern. And this isn't just some abstract philosophical notion. It can be directly perceived in deep meditation or sometimes spontaneously in moments of heightened awareness. The vibratory nature of reality can become apparent. You might feel a subtle tingling or humming throughout your body and the space around it. You might sense that what seems solid is actually trembling, pulsating, alive with energy. The Tibetan Buddhists have a practice called sound into silence, where they listen to the fading resonance of a bell until they can no longer hear it with their ears and then continue to hear it with their whole being. In this practice, they are training themselves to perceive the subtle vibrations that underlie all experience. What's fascinating is that this vibratory perception isn't limited to the auditory sense. It can extend to all the senses, to the entirety of experience. You might begin to hear with your eyes, to see with your skin, to sense the underlying rhythm that unites all sensory modalities. This is what the spiritually awakened eyes perceive. The song beneath the silence, the dance beneath the stillness, the vibration beneath the matter. They see that what appears most solid is actually most fluid. that what seems most fixed is actually most alive. And when you begin to perceive the world in this way, you can no longer maintain the illusion that you are a solid separate entity moving through a world of other solid separate entities. You recognize yourself as a pattern of vibration in resonance with the entire cosmic symphony, not a noun but a verb, not a thing but a process, not an is but a happening. There's a delightful moment in spiritual awakening that I'm particularly fond of. The moment when you get the cosmic joke and it's a real belly laugh, not just an intellectual amusement. A laugh that comes from the depths of your being, that shakes not just your body but your very sense of self. What is this cosmic joke? It's the realization that what you've been earnestly seeking, enlightenment, God, truth, peace, love, happiness, is what you already are. It's the recognition that the seeker is the sought. It's like searching frantically for your glasses, only to discover they've been on your nose the whole time. Or like a fish swimming desperately in search of water. The joke is that you can't become what you already are. You can't attain what you never lost. You can't reach what's already here. The spiritually awakened eyes see this cosmic joke. They see the humor in our earnest spiritual seeking, our desperate self-improvement projects, our frantic efforts to become something other than what we are. Not with judgment or condescension, but with the gentle, compassionate humor of someone who recognizes their own folly. The Zen masters were masters of this divine humor. When asked profound spiritual questions, they would often respond with something seemingly absurd or mundane. What is the Buddha? 3 pounds of flax. What is the meaning of the Bodhidharmas coming from the west with the cypress tree in the garden? These responses aren't meant to be cryptic or evasive. They're meant to jolt the questioner out of conceptual thinking, out of the mistaken notion that spiritual truth is something exotic or esoteric. They're pointing to the ordinary, the everyday, the right here, right now, as the very location of what we're seeking. The cosmic joke has many layers. Another one is the realization that the ego, that sense of being a separate self that's so desperately seeking enlightenment, is precisely what keeps us from recognizing our already enlightened nature. It's like a character in a dream trying to wake up. The character can never wake up. It's only the dreamer who can. And you are the dreamer, not just the character. And here's perhaps the most delicious layer of the joke. The very idea that spirituality is serious, somber, grave business. That it's about renunciation, asceticism, solemnity, that it's about becoming holy, pure, perfect. The spiritually awakened eyes see that this is all backwards. True spirituality is playful, light, even mischievous. It's about lightening up, not tightening up. It's about becoming more human, not less. It's about embracing our messy, contradictory, all too human nature, rather than trying to transcend it. There's a wonderful Zen saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The external activities may look the same, but the internal attitude is transformed. There's a lightness, a playfulness, a humor that pervades even the most mundane activities. This doesn't mean that life becomes a perpetual laugh riot. The awakened heart is still moved by the suffering of the world. The awakened mind still engages seriously with serious matters. But underlying it all is a profound ease, a divine humor, a recognition of the cosmic joke. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this joke is that once you get it, you can't help but laugh. And your laughter becomes an invitation for others to join in. Not because you're trying to enlighten them, but because joy, like laughter, is contagious. Spiritually awakened eyes see the cosmic humor in all things, the divine play behind even the most seemingly tragic circumstances, not in a way that dismisses or trivializes suffering, but in a way that contextualizes it within the larger dance of existence. They see that even in the midst of sorrow, there's the possibility of joy. Even in the midst of darkness, there's the possibility of light. Even in the midst of the most serious business, there's the possibility of laughter. Have you ever looked deeply into someone's eyes and had the uncanny sense that you were looking not just at another person, but somehow into yourself? Or perhaps you've had that strange moment of recognition when you realize that the qualities you most admire or despise in others are the very ones you embrace or deny in yourself. What spiritually awakened eyes perceive is that consciousness itself is like a mirror reflecting back to us not just the external world, but the nature of our own being. Or to put it another way, what we see out there is intimately connected to what we are in here. This isn't some abstract metaphysical concept. It's something you can verify in your direct experience. When you're angry, the world appears hostile. When you're loving, the world appears friendly. When you're depressed, the world seems bleak. When you're joyful, the world appears beautiful. We tend to think this is just a matter of subjective coloring, that there's an objective reality out there that we're perceiving through different emotional filters. But what if the relationship goes deeper than that? What if consciousness and its content aren't two separate things, but two aspects of a single reality? The great non-dual traditions, advanced Zen, Taoism, Kashmir, Shiism, all point to this profound truth that consciousness and its objects are not separate. Subject and object, perceiver and perceived, seer and seen arise together interdependently. They are, as the Upanishads say, like two birds on the same tree. Spiritually awakened eyes recognize this mirror-like nature of consciousness. They see that what we call the world is not something completely external to awareness, but something that arises within awareness, like a dream arises within the mind of a dreamer. This doesn't mean the world isn't real. It means the world and awareness aren't two separate realities, but two aspects of a single, undivided wholeness. Let me offer an analogy. Think of consciousness as the ocean and particular experiences, sights, sounds, thoughts, emotions, as waves on that ocean. The waves aren't separate from the ocean. They're what the ocean is doing. In the same way, your experiences aren't separate from consciousness. They're what consciousness is doing. What's particularly fascinating about this mirror-like quality of consciousness is that it works in both directions. Not only does your state of consciousness affect how you perceive the world, but how you relate to the world affects your state of consciousness. If you approach others with judgment, you likely feel judged. If you approach others with compassion, you likely feel a sense of connection. This is the deeper meaning behind the Golden Rule and similar ethical teachings from various traditions. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you isn't just practical advice for getting along in society. It's a recognition of the mirror-like nature of consciousness. How you treat others is in a very real sense how you treat yourself. The spiritually awakened eyes see this mirroring everywhere. They recognize that the qualities they perceive in others, both positive and negative, are reflections of qualities within themselves. Not in a simplistic one-tone correspondence, but in the sense that nothing can be recognized unless it's already known on some level within. And this recognition leads to a profound shift in how they relate to others. Instead of seeing others as completely separate beings to be judged, manipulated, or controlled, they see others as different expressions of the same consciousness that they themselves are. Not identical. Each expression is unique, but not ultimately separate either. This doesn't mean the boundaries between individuals disappear. You don't lose the ability to distinguish between yourself and others. But you recognize that these boundaries are more like the membranes between cells in a body than like the walls between houses in a neighborhood. They're permeable, interconnected, part of a larger wholeness. When you begin to see with these awakened eyes, every encounter becomes an opportunity for self-recognition, for seeing yourself in the other and the other in yourself. Every relationship becomes a mirror reflecting back to you aspects of your own consciousness that might otherwise remain hidden, and every interaction becomes an invitation to recognize the shared consciousness that underlies all apparent separation. One of the most profound shifts that occurs when the eyes awaken spiritually is a fundamental transformation in how we perceive morality. The rigid categories of good and evil begin to dissolve, not into an amoral nihilism, but into a more nuanced, compassionate, and holistic understanding. Let me be clear. This isn't about abandoning ethics or embracing moral relativism. It's about recognizing that our conventional moral frameworks, while useful for social functioning, often reflect a limited and dualistic perspective that doesn't capture the full complexity of reality. Think of it this way. Most of us are taught to divide the world into neat moral categories. This action is good, that one is bad, this person is virtuous, that one is wicked, and we're encouraged to identify with the good, to strive toward it, and to reject the evil, to push it away. But what the spiritually awakened eyes see is that this dualistic framework creates a fundamental split, not just in our perception of the world, but in our own psyches. We identify with the aspects of ourselves that we judge as good and reject, repress or deny the aspects we judge as bad. And in doing so, we create what Jung called the shadow, those disowned parts of ourselves that don't fit our idealized self-image. The awakened perspective doesn't deny the practical distinction between helpful and harmful action, but it recognizes that the moral qualities we perceive are not inherent in the actions themselves, but arise from a complex interplay of intentions, contexts, consequences, and judgments. Consider the Taoist parable of the farmer whose horse runs away. The neighbors say, "What bad luck." The farmer replies, "Perhaps." The next day, the horse returns, bringing several wild horses. "What good luck," say the neighbors. "Perhaps," responds the farmer. Then the farmer's son breaks his leg trying to tame one of the wild horses. "What bad luck," say the neighbors. "Perhaps," says the farmer. The next day, military officials come to draft young men for war, but they pass over the son because of his broken leg. "What good luck," say the neighbors. "Perhaps," says the farmer. The point isn't that nothing matters, or that all outcomes are equal. The point is that our limited perspective makes absolute moral judgments problematic. What appears evil from one angle may reveal hidden benefits from another. What seems good in the short term may lead to suffering in the long term, and vice versa. The spiritually awakened eyes see beyond these rigid categories. They perceive the interdependence of opposites, how good and evil, like all dualities, define and create each other. They recognize that light cannot exist without shadow, pleasure without pain, birth without death. This doesn't lead to moral paralysis, but to a more nuanced, compassionate response to life's complexities. Instead of condemning the evil and attaching to the good, there arises a willingness to work skillfully with whatever arises, to respond to each situation with wisdom rather than rigid moral judgment. There's a wonderful Zen story about a master who, when asked about the nature of enlightenment, replied, "When I was unenlightened, rivers were rivers and mountains were mountains. When I was striving for enlightenment, rivers were no longer rivers and mountains were no longer mountains. Now that I am enlightened, rivers are again rivers and mountains are again mountains." In the same way, before spiritual awakening, good is good and evil is evil. During the process of awakening, these categories become fluid, questionable, relative. But with full awakening, there's a return to moral discrimination, not based on rigid dogma or simplistic dualism, but on a deep recognition of interdependence and compassion. The awakened eyes see that every villain is also a victim, that every saint has shadows, that every demon has divine potential, and that every angel has feet of clay. They see the whole human being. Not enlightenment, whatever name we give it, is not an object to be attained or a state to be achieved, but the very ground of our being. It's what we already are, beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the sense of separate self, beneath the restless seeking itself. This doesn't mean that all spiritual practice is futile, or that we should abandon our aspiration for greater awareness, compassion, and understanding. But it means that the orientation of these practices shift. Instead of practicing to achieve a future state, we practice to uncover what's already here. Instead of seeking to add something to ourselves, we seek to remove the veils that obscure our true nature. It's like polishing a mirror. The reflective quality of the mirror is intrinsic to it. Polishing doesn't add reflection, but removes the dust that obscures it. In the same way, spiritual practice doesn't add enlightenment, but removes the ignorance that obscures it. This perspective transforms how we approach the spiritual path. Instead of striving, grasping, accumulating, spiritual experiences or insights, there's a letting go, a relaxing into what already is. Instead of trying to become something other than what we are, there's an allowing of what we are to reveal itself. There's a beautiful Zen teaching that captures this. You are already perfect and you could use a little improvement. This delightful paradox points to the truth that our essential nature is already complete, already enlightened, already divine, and at the relative level there's always room for refinement, for growth, for evolution. The spiritually awakened eyes hold both these truths simultaneously. They see both our absolute nature, which is already perfect, and our relative manifestation, which is always evolving. They see both the changeless ground of being and the ever-changing play of becoming. And this dual vision brings a profound peace. When you recognize that what you truly are is already whole, already complete, already enlightened, the desperate seeking falls away. You can still engage in spiritual practice, in self-improvement, in the work of making the world a better place, but you do so from a place of fullness rather than lack, from a place of love rather than fear. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." What the Buddha meant when he pointed to our Buddha nature. What the Upanishads meant by tatam I, thou art that. Not that you will become divine in some future state if you practice hard enough, but that your true nature is already divine, already enlightened, already free. The end of seeking doesn't mean the end of action, the end of care, the end of love. It means that these flow from a different source, not from a sense of lack or need or fear, but from a sense of fullness, of joy, of love that can't help but express itself. And this is perhaps the most beautiful thing that spiritually awakened eyes perceive. That when the seeking ends, true living begins. Not the desperate striving for some future salvation, but the joyful expression of what you already are. Not the anxious pursuit of happiness, but the natural radiance of your innate well-being. Not the fearful grasping for love, but the spontaneous overflow of the love that you already are. As our journey together comes to a close, I invite you to pause and consider what we've explored. We've looked at what spiritually awakened eyes perceive the world beyond conceptual filters. The illusion of separation, the cosmic game, the eternal now, the dance of emptiness and form, the vibration behind matter, the cosmic joke, the mirror of consciousness, the perspective beyond good and evil, and the end of seeking. But here's the most remarkable thing about all of this. I haven't been describing some exotic state accessible only to spiritual masters who spent decades in meditation caves. I've been describing your natural state, your birthright, what you already are, beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the conceptual overlays, beneath the sense of separate self. The spiritually awakened eyes aren't something you need to acquire. They are the eyes you were born with, the eyes that see without interpretation, without judgment, without separation. They are the eyes of a newborn looking at the world with wonder, with openness, with innocence. They are your eyes before you were taught how to see. And they're still there behind the veils of conditioning, behind the filters of conceptual thinking, behind the sense of separate self. They're still seeing, still knowing, still recognizing the truth of what is. So the spiritual journey isn't about gaining something you don't have. It's about recognizing what you already are. It's not about becoming something other than what you are. It's about allowing what you are to reveal itself. And the beautiful thing is you don't need to force this recognition. You don't need to struggle for it. You don't need to earn it. You just need to get out of its way, to let go of the seeking, the striving, the grasping, to rest in the simplicity of what is here and now. Because the truth is you've never been anything other than what you truly are. You've never been anywhere other than here. You've never experienced any moment other than now. The sense of separation, of incompleteness, of something missing. That's the dream from which we're awakening. And when you awaken, you don't become something other than what you are. You simply recognize what you've always been. You don't go anywhere. You simply realize where and what you already are. So I invite you right now to let go of the seeking, the striving, the grasping, to rest in the simplicity of what is, to allow your naturally awakened eyes to see without interpretation, without judgment, without separation. Because what they'll see is what has always been true, that you are already whole, already complete, already enlightened, that the peace you seek is what you already are, that the love you long for is your very nature, that the truth you're searching for is staring back at you from every face, every flower, every star in the night sky. And in that recognition, the search ends and true living begins. Not the desperate striving for some future salvation, but the joyful expression of what you already are. Not the anxious pursuit of happiness, but the natural radiance of your innate well-being. Not the fearful grasping for love, but the spontaneous overflow of the love that you are. The spiritually awakened eyes see what has always been true, that there is nowhere to go, nothing to become, nothing to attain. There is only this moment, this breath, this life, this awareness, this love, and it is enough. It is everything. It is all there is, and it is what you are.